What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there. We head into week 6 of fantasy football, and we're talking about the running backs we're going to start and sit here this week. Now, bye weeks have started, and they're going to be a pain in the backside for you at this position. Just this week, going to be without Jamal Williams / DeAndre Swift, had he been ready to go. Dameon Pierce not going to be here this week. How about Josh Jacobs? Carried a lot of people to victory just last week. He's on bye this week, along with King Henry. Derrick Henry himself not going to be playing here in week 6. Now, when it comes to bye weeks, you don't want to get too cute, right? There's a lot of information in this show here today, and a lot of it's going to be like, yeah, I know I should start that guy, but the reason we still go through all of these matchups is so you have an opportunity to hear about the players on your team and whether or not you can maybe expect a big game or should start stressing here a little bit early. Now, before we get into every matchup, I have a giveaway. I haven't done a giveaway yet so far in season in one of the regular videos. It's time, and the time is now. I have a signed, authentic Joe Mixon jersey right here. Right there. There's the signature. There's a certificate of authenticity from our friends at Pristine Auction. All you need to do to be eligible is leave a comment down below, hit that like button, and then make sure you have a free account signed up on pristineauction.com. There's a link down below in the description. Doesn't cost you anything. You go there, you sign up for a free account. We're going to put a $10 credit into your account if you decide to purchase something at some point. You get $10 off, totally free to you, and then you're entered in to that giveaway there. Looking forward to announcing that winner on this show just next week. We pull all these items out of our mystery box during the tailgate show on Fridays. Don't miss out, because I have a ton of good things coming up here in the next few weeks. So here we go. Let's go ahead and dive in first to Thursday Night Football. A real barn burner we got here between the Washington Commandos and Chicago Bears. And right off the bat, not the greatest of matchups here, and we'll start with the Washington Commandos. And this backfield is an absolute mess. You got Antonio Gibson, now Brian Robinson back in the mix, J.D. McKissick. The Antonio Gibson free fall continues, and this is exactly what we were expecting this offseason. When they drafted Brian Robinson, we said we need to be a little bit worried about Antonio Gibson. Then all of a sudden, Brian Robinson returns just last week, only 6 weeks after being shot in the leg multiple times, and tripled the amount of carries that Antonio Gibson had on the ground. If that isn't a tall tale sign of what's about to happen in Washington, I don't know what else is. The free fall continues for Antonio Gibson. He's down to running back 22. He has averaged like 5 fantasy points over the last 2 games played. Now a matchup going up against Chicago isn't bad. They allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs, sitting at 23.5 fantasy points per game allowed. Offensive tackle Sam Cosmi is injured, but that's really the only injury affecting this running game. More than anything, we have ourselves a bottom 5 rushing team in the NFL in a 3-way split backfield, a pass-heavy offense, and then on top of all of that, a Thursday night nightmare. I don't know if we can trust this backfield here at all in Washington for a few weeks until we get a little bit more clarity. On the other side of the football, David Montgomery seems to be pretty close to full health. Both of these running backs averaging right around 10 to 11 fantasy points per game, but DeMont was pretty inefficient last week, averaging only 1.67 yards per carry. What helped him last week was he racked in 62 receiving yards, so that was definitely a bonus, but a healthy David Montgomery is the one to dominate the touches in this backfield. He out-touched Herbert last week in his first week coming off of injury, 16-4. Washington allows just about 21 fantasy points per game, 13th most in the NFL. No major injury concerns here affecting the running game. And like I said, a healthy Monty is a lead back Monty. Saw that just coming off of the injury. If they were worried, we would have seen less touches last week. When you have a guy getting 16 plus touches a week in a run-heavy offense like they are in Chicago, we're going to start him here on Thursday Night Football. Which will take us now over to Sunday football. We have the San Francisco 49ers, Atlanta Falcons. Start off on the 49ers side of the football. We got Jeff Wilson Jr., and now we got Tevin Coleman, who I guess we kind of need to talk about a little bit. Right now, Jeff Wilson currently running back 17 overall on the season, averaging 11 fantasy points per game, has touchdowns now in back-to-back games, and is averaging a career-high 5.1 yards per carry. We also saw Tevin Coleman get in the mix a little bit last week with 19 snaps. Out of the 19 snaps that he played, 11 of them were actual touches that went to him for a total of 67 yards and a touchdown. That's pretty efficient right there with making do with what was given to him. Now, right now, Jeff Wilson Jr. averaging right around 16 touches a game. Coleman had 11 last week in his first game back as a San Francisco 49er now, but we know he understands this offense. He's been with Kyle Shanahan multiple times throughout his career. Now a matchup going up against Atlanta. They're allowing just over 21 fantasy points per game, 12th most in the NFL. They're still missing Trent Williams on the offensive line. Colton McKivitz, another guy they're missing there as well, and that hurts just a little bit, but I'm not overly surprised about the touches going to Tevin Coleman. 16 touches a week, though, is fine for me to still feel comfortable starting Jeff Wilson. Can we bank on that efficiency and that touchdown every week from Tevin Coleman in this offense? Probably not. So as of right now, I'm just sticking with Jeff Wilson Jr. and seeing where this backfield goes over the next couple of weeks. Their opponents, Tyler Algier, Caleb Huntley. Neither of these guys did very much with their touches back in week 5. No targets for either of them in the passing game, which absolutely sucks. Neither one of these guys are really going to see a bell cow type role. They're going to split touches in this backfield, and they're going to hover right around 10 touches a week. The problem is they can't really get a big enough lead to rely on their running game, and that's going to kind of limit the ceiling for these guys each week. San Francisco now is not an easy matchup either. They're allowing only 15 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, third fewest in the NFL, and this defense right now is playing pretty lights out. No major injuries of concern here. This is just not a matchup that I really want to tempt with a couple of running backs that have low ceilings anyway. Not in a week like this. Even with some bye weeks this week, I feel like there may be some other options that may be a little riskier, but the potential ceiling a little bit higher. I'm going to go ahead and sit both the guys in Atlanta. How about New England and Cleveland, which is going to be my Manscaped matchup of the week. Don't forget, as soon as this video is over, head over to manscaped.com. Get yourself something nice for the travel bag, fellas. It's not just ball trimmers. They got you covered with whatever you may need. Make sure you use promo code Headliners at checkout. Receive 20% off and free shipping. Do it before the holiday rush gets here. But for this matchup, we got Ramondre Stevenson now as the lead back in New England. We're going to be without Damian Harris now for a few weeks, which means Ramondre Stevenson's going to get an absolutely massive opportunity, and he was already top 20 at the running back position while splitting touches with Damian Harris here to start the season. But now he's going to be the guy. He's been averaging right around 16 touches a game, but now, without Harris just last week, saw 27 touches in week 5. Going up against Cleveland, they allow the third most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 26.9 per week. No major injuries here affecting the running game in New England, and if the pass work was consistent, honestly, I would have made my X factor a 5. I have loved this kid for a long time, and now we're going to see him get a chance in an offense that's going to rely heavily on him. I'm definitely going to start Ramondre Stevenson here this week. And then the opponents, I think by now we're all pretty comfortable starting Nick Chubb, right? He's the number 1 running back in all of fantasy football in half PPR scoring, averaging over 21.6 fantasy points per game. Kareem Hunt still also inside the top 20, sitting at running back 18 overall. Chubb is one of only 6 running backs right now averaging over 20 touches a game, and Hunt's hovering right around 14 or so per contest. But New England, not the easiest to run on. They're allowing only 15.9 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. This could be an uphill battle for these guys this week. Luckily, no major new injury concerns affecting them. Chubb's efficiency is off the charts, though. He's averaging a career-high 6.1 yards per carry, has 5 straight games with over 100 total yards. We can't ignore this matchup. This team did just shut down Detroit. Now, on the surface, that sounds really weird to say because you're like, duh, it's Detroit. But they were the number 1 scoring offense in all the NFL, and they did nothing against this defense just last week. You can't really afford to sit either one of these guys, but maybe we have to temper expectations just a little bit. How about the New York Jets and the Green Bay Packers? Breece Hall, Michael Carter for the Jets. Breece Hall is all the way up to running back 10 overall on the season, averaging 14 fantasy points per game. He's getting right around 14.5 touches per week, but has had 19 plus touches now in back-to-back games. Carter kind of staying in the fringe 11 to 12 touches per week, and he's kind of be like a thorn in the side of Breece Hall going forward with a matchup going up against the Packers, who allow 20 fantasy points per game to running backs, 16th, right there in the middle of the league. I'm actually going to go over to Prize Picks here once again, and I'm going to smash the over on Breece Hall. It's currently set at 57.5 rushing yards. He's done that now in back-to-back games, and with the volume he's seen, I'm going to smash the over. Make sure you sign up for that new account at Prize Picks using referral code Headliners when you do so, and come have some fun with us. The offensive line's still pretty banged up there in New York, but they're still finding a way to come up with some big plays, which is great. We're starting to see the confidence in Breece Hall. The big plays are there. 4 straight weeks now with increasing snap percentage. Maybe kind of just hope for the touchdown vulturing of Michael Carter stop. Maybe that was a 1-week thing where Breece Hall was just getting a breather. The guy had almost 200 total yards, so a great game for Breece Hall last week. He's obviously a start for Green Bay. I mean, Aaron Jones has looked really good this year. He's averaging the highest yards per attempt of his career at 6.4, has had 80-plus total yards now in 3 of the last 4 games played, currently running back 14 overall in the season, where we're starting to see A.J. Dillon fall down these ranks down to running back 33 overall. They both average right around 15 touches a week, which is crazy to think about. They're getting similar touches, yet the production is way higher for Aaron Jones than it is for A.J. Dillon. Last week, A.J. Dillon only saw 20 snaps, the lowest number he's seen in a game this season. Now they're going up against the Jets, who are 15th in the league, right there middle of the pack against opposing running backs, allowing 20.4 fantasy points per game. I'm actually going to go back to Prize Picks here on Aaron Jones, and I'm going to smash the over of 62.5 rushing yards for this game. He's done that in 3 of his last 4 games played, and definitely an opportunity for him to do it again here this week. No other major injury concerns here. Aaron Jones is still the man in this backfield. He looks explosive on the field. He's doing great things when he's touching the football, and we know that the touchdowns can come in bunches when it comes to Aaron Jones. Dillon, more of a low-end flex play for me. With bye weeks here, if you're missing some of your studs, A.J. Dillon could be one of those guys that fills in for your flex play. Not somebody who I'm going to have very high in my rankings. He'll be down a little bit lower. Like I said, flex play or a bye week fill-in if need be. How about Jacksonville and Indianapolis? These two just played back in week 2. In that game, James Robinson had 23 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown on the ground, where Etienne had 53 total yards on only 12 touches. Since then, though, Etienne's kind of stepping up a little bit. He's outscored James Robinson now in back-to-back weeks. But why? Why has that happened all of a sudden? Well, the last 2 weeks, Jacksonville has been trailing and utilizing the big playability of Travis Etienne just a little bit more. James Robinson's just kind of coming crashing back down to earth here over the last couple weeks. He's down to an average of 15 touches a game, where Etienne is now up to 11 touches per contest. And over the last 2 games played, Travis Etienne has outsnapped James Robinson. A matchup going up against Indianapolis, they allow just under 20 fantasy points per game. Still one of the healthiest teams in the NFL overall. They did just lose offensive tackle Ben Bartch to a knee injury, so that is one injury that they're dealing with. But we're starting to see a slight changing of the guard in Jacksonville. Etienne is starting to look better, and James Robinson just isn't finding the end zone. This is where we said he would struggle for the first few weeks. When the touchdowns stop, we're going to start being a little bit frustrated with James Robinson. They haven't been there. He needs those touchdowns right now. Travis Etienne seems to be a little bit more explosive, kind of similar to the A.J. Dillon situation here above, right? Travis Etienne, not really somebody that's going to be super high up my rankings. These guys are basically flex plays this week because of the bye weeks. They give you an opportunity at somebody with a decent matchup that has a potential high ceiling that you can plug and play this week if needed. But then their opponents, I mean, this backfield is a total mess with the Indianapolis Colts. You got Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, Deion Jackson. I don't even have Phillip Lindsay here on the screen. So many options and so much unknown in this backfield. We know Jonathan Taylor is still hurt and was struggling before he was injured. Deion Jackson looked pretty good with the opportunity that he had last week. But what happens if Jonathan Taylor returns? Is there a big-time split in this backfield? Deion Jackson was the guy last week after we lost Nyheim Hines early in that game to a concussion. Had 17 touches last week in week 5. The Jags allow the 10th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 22 per game. Jonathan Taylor banged up. Nyheim Hines still in concussion protocol. Center Ryan Kelly hurting as well. we just don't really know what to expect in this backfield and who's actually going to be available here this week. This is going to be one of those situations where you need to follow the videos throughout the week, and we'll continue to update you in the rankings video, in the injury report video, in the live shows this weekend, till we can really get a clearer picture of what is happening here. If Jonathan Taylor is active in a week in which we're missing studs due to bye weeks, I don't know how we can afford to sit him. If he does sit, honestly, Deion Jackson becomes a name that may climb up the rankings and be a decent flex play bye-week fill-in option if he is the lead guy here this week, and it's just something we're going to have to pay attention to. How about the Minnesota Vikings and Miami Dolphins? Dalvin Cook kind of working his way back up the rankings, right? Currently running back 13 overall in fantasy football, coming off his best game of the year, had 121 total yards and 2 touchdowns. He's averaging all the way up to 19 touches a week. Now going up against Miami, who allows the 9th most fantasy points to running backs at 23 fantasy points per game. No other major injury concerns for Dalvin Cook. He seems to be playing through his own injury pretty well. The pass work has come down here over the last few weeks, and that's really limiting the potential huge ceiling, but still solid production. I don't need to tell you to start Dalvin Cook. How about their opponents? We got Chase Edmonds and Raheem. I'm not quite a must-start Mostert, but he's pretty freaking close at this point. Both of these guys find themselves currently outside the top 30 running backs on the season, but Raheem Mostert is climbing quickly. He just had 19 touches for 122 total yards and a touchdown just last week in week 5. Edmonds, basically a bench warmer at this point, only played in 10 snaps in week 5, and his snaps have decreased now in 5 straight weeks. Mostert's touches, they've been going up over 3 straight games. They continue to increase, and like I said, he just had 19 in week 5. Going up against Minnesota, they are 11th in the NFL with points allowed to the running backs at 22 per game. Who is going to be the quarterback this week for the Miami Dolphins? Do we see Teddy Two Gloves back? Is Tua even an option? Is it Skylar Thompson? Tyreek Hill currently in a walking boot. Offensive tackle Terron Armstead is still injured. A lot of unknowns in this offense, but the one known over the last few weeks has been Raheem Mostert. He's definitely trending up, and despite the quarterback concerns, it really only helps him, because if they don't want to put too much on the plate of the quarterback, they're relying more on the running game, which right now is Raheem Mostert. He's definitely somebody I can rely on a lot more than Chase Edmonds, who's been nothing but disappointing so far this year. In my opinion, Raheem Mostert, a flex play, a bye week fill-in for us in week 6. How about Cincinnati and New Orleans? Now started off with Joe Mixon, who a lot of people are somewhat down on right this second, but he's still currently running back 16 overall. He's yet to have a 100-yard rushing game, and I think that's why a lot of people getting frustrated. But this offensive line has been so bad to start the year. Plus, the play calling is a little weird also. I don't know if you watched the game last week, but he really started to improve as the game went on. There was a stretch there in the second half where we were seeing Joe Mixon basically pop off 10 yards every single time he was touching the football, and then they kind of just went away from it. I mean, he's averaging the most touches in the NFL right now at 23 per game, but a matchup going up against New Orleans is not easy. They allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs at only 16.9 per game. I don't know about you, but I'd be happy if Joe Mixon left with 16.9 points. The problem is they're still sprinkling in a little bit too much Samaje Perine for my liking. Offensive lineman Jonah Williams is banged up. What happens with T. Higgins here this week? He really looked better, like I said, as the game went on in week 5. Why they abandoned it, I really don't understand. We need more passing work out of Joe Mixon to bring that floor back up. This is a very tough matchup. He's a start, but as you can see, with only 16 points out of a potential 25, I'm not overly confident in it here this week. His opponent, Alvin Kamara, finally, it took 5 weeks to get Kamara going to where he had a good game, and then dude came out and had 194 total yards, but no touchdowns yet so far on the season, averaging 19 touches a game in the 3 games that he has played so far this year. But Cincinnati's been pretty solid against opposing running backs as well, allowing only 15.4 fantasy points per game, 4th fewest in the NFL. Not an easy matchup this week for Alvin Kamara. Do we have Jameis Winston back? We have Chris Olave in concussion protocol. What about Michael Thomas? Does he return? Jarvis Landry is banged up as well. As you can tell right now, Alvin Kamara, one of the only healthy options for the New Orleans Saints. Does that change as the week goes on? That's something we're paying attention to, but you're not going to sit Alvin Kamara, not with all the bye week feelings, not the game that he's coming off of when he looked pretty well. We're obviously still starting Alvin Kamara. How about the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Giants? Start off with J.K. Dobbins. Now, just as he started to look better, he only had 26 snaps in week 5, but yet averaged 5.5 yards per carry. The problem was only had 8 touches, which is just kind of weird. It was one of those games where we saw Lamar just going deeper down the field more than maybe we would have liked. But now they get a matchup going up against New York, who is surprisingly pretty decent against opposing running backs, allowing only 18.3 fantasy points per game, 11th fewest in the NFL. We know that Ronnie Stanley is back, but he's on somewhat of a pitch count where they're not keeping him out there the entire game to try to make sure that they work him back in slowly. Offensive tackle Ben Cleveland is out. What about Rashad Bateman? Does he return this week? A lot of question marks and a lot of Devin Duvernay in the backfield, which is just one of those situations where they schemed a little bit different in week 5. Are we totally worried and totally panicked about J.K. Dobbins? No. I'm really not. I mean, he's still a guy that can score on any single play. He plays on a team that's going to run the ball a butt ton. It's just these inconsistencies that kind of keep him locked in as a flex play that's a little bit lower in the rankings because we can't overly trust a high performance each and every week. With bye weeks this week, though, we'll start J.K. Dobbins. And we'll for sure start his opponent, right? Saquon Barkley, that's not a surprise to anyone. He's currently running back 3 overall in fantasy football and absolutely carrying the Giants offense. He's number 2 in the NFL in touches at 23 per game. Going up against Baltimore, they allow over 19 fantasy points per game. No major injury concerns to point out here affecting Saquon Barkley. There's no doubt he's a start. We lock him in weekly, and we love the big plays that we continue to see. How about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Pittsburgh Steelers now? Start off with regular season Lenny Fournette, who's all the way up to running back 7 overall on the year, and has had 3 touchdowns now over his last 2 games combined. 17 receptions as well in those last 2 games, and that's why we love ourselves some Uncle Lenny. Currently averaging just about 20 touches per game. The passing game is really helping out his floor weekly. 11 targets and 10 receptions just last week in week 5 is exactly what we love to see here from Leonard Fournette. Now a matchup going up against Pittsburgh. They allow over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. No major injuries of concerns here affecting Leonard Fournette any further, but there's always that chance of Rachaad White stealing a touchdown. He's definitely somebody who has a role in this offense, and it's going to continue to grow. Does that mean that we're going to start losing value of Leonard Fournette? No, more than likely not. But similar to the whole New York Jets situation, Leonard Fournette could help them get all the way down the field, be pulled off for a breather, and we could see some vultured touchdowns at time from Rachaad White. That's what's going to keep his X factor a little bit low, but still a start. His opponent, Najee Harris. We're basically in full panic mode over Najee Harris. Now, we were not overly high on Najee coming in. We expected a slow start from him, but it's going to be bad here for a few weeks, and the matchups just don't seem to be getting any easier. He's currently down to running back 29 overall. Hasn't broken 75 yards rushing in a game yet this year. Efficiencies are down across the board. He's only averaging 3.2 yards per attempt right now. Woof. Not good whatsoever. He's still touching the ball, those 16 touches per game, but now a matchup against Buffalo. I mean, last week he just had Tampa Bay. It's not getting any easier for Najee Harris. The Bills, they only allow 14 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, second best in the NFL. It's a banged up secondary that's being scored on, which is really, leading to Pittsburgh having to throw the ball a lot more, not really utilizing Najee heavily on the ground or in the passing game. I mean, how do you really sit this guy with bye weeks? But everything on paper, production, volume, matchups, everything on paper says that this is not a good start for Najee Harris. He's literally got nothing going for him right now. It's really hard to do this, but as of right now, I got to sit Najee Harris. How about the Carolina Panthers and Los Angeles Rams? We have Christian McCaffrey, who is an obvious start for your fantasy team here this week. Kind of total opposite spectrum of Najee Harris, right? He's currently running back 6 overall, averaging 16 fantasy points per game. No more Matt Rule, which I guess means it can't get any worse in Carolina. He just had his first game of the season, though, where he saw work both on the ground and in the passing game. He had 14 carries and 12 targets last week. Love that type of usage each and every week from Christian McCaffrey. Does that continue? Because he's averaging just under 20 total touches a week and doing a little bit of everything in this offense. But now he gets the Los Angeles Rams, who are the #1 team in the NFL when it comes to fewest points allowed to opposing running backs at only 14.1 fantasy points per game. Baker Mayfield, banged up. If he plays, how much more reliant will he be on Christian McCaffrey? Because he's not going to have time in the pocket against LA. I could see a lot of check downs this week going the way of Christian McCaffrey, which will raise his floor up a little bit, but maybe that ceiling going to be brought down quite a bit here in a difficult matchup. He's still a start. For his opponents, ain't no way in hell I'm touching this backfield. And nobody really wants to touch this offense overall outside of Cooper Kupp. I'm not excited at all to want to start Cam Akers or Darrell Henderson. This backfield is the worst in the NFL, dead last in the league in rush attempts, yards, and rushes for first downs. They're just not doing anything in this running game. Akers averaging right around 10 touches per game, Henderson right around 9. Now going up against Carolina, they've been vulnerable on the ground. They allow the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs at 24.2 points per game. But they have multiple offensive line missing. Brian Allen, David Edwards, Coleman Shelton. This offense overall is just in shambles. I don't see how anyone out there can trust either Cam Akers or Darrell Henderson in their lineup. If I had to take a stab on one, it would be Cam Akers, but I would be absolutely terrified. How about Arizona and Seattle? James Conner and Eno Benjamin for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, James Conner just can't seem to really get going. He can't seem to stay healthy is the problem. No major injuries, but he's just getting banged up weekly. Has no touchdowns now in 4 straight games, and Eno really saved his week last week with the touchdown that he got. Right now, James Conner sitting at 13.5 touches per game. Eno is climbing, though, all the way up to 8 touches per game now. It's a great matchup for these guys. Going up against Seattle, they allow over 25 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's 5th most in the NFL. Conner's dealing with a rib injury. We have multiple offensive line injuries with Rodney Hudson and Max Garcia. Even running back Darrell Williams is injured as well, which means we could see a whole lot of Eno Benjamin if James Conner can't find a way to get healthy in time for this game. Now, obviously, if James Conner plays, it brings the ceiling down of both of these guys. If James Conner sits, sure, we're going to see some Eno Benjamin, but similar to what we saw last year with Chase Edmonds. He's not the type of running back that can go out there and handle 20, 25 touches, be a bell cow type of guy. What makes him work is the role that he's currently in. Same type of thing we say for Tony Pollard all the time. But here's the issue that I'm kind of running into. I kind of see a whole lot of Rondale Moore this week in this matchup. Seattle can put points on the board. Geno Smith playing pretty well. This screams Rondale Moore for me, even getting some work out in the backfield if we don't have James Conner this week. Just something to pay attention to, but not a backfield I'm overly excited for. For their opponent, we now have Kenneth Walker III because Rashad Penny done for the year. Now, on paper last week, the stat line for Kenneth Walker looked pretty good. 8 carries, 88 yards, and a touchdown. But 69 of those yards was on one run last week, which resulted in that touchdown. If you take that out, 7 carries for 19 yards, slightly underwhelming, but he's going to be the true lead back in this offense going forward. We just haven't had a chance to see him with a whole lot of volume this year, right? Whenever they were really reliant on the running game in Seattle, it was mostly either Rashad Penny, or we've even seen, Travis Homer and DJ Dallas kind of sprinkled in as Kenneth Walker was returning from injury. But now a matchup going up against Arizona, they're pretty solid against opposing running backs, allowing 18.8 fantasy points per game to that position. But with no Rashad Penny, Walker's going to get his chance. Also, another injury on the offensive line, Gabe Jackson, questionable to play with a hip flexor injury. But this is a home game in Seattle where we know the 12s are going to be there. It's the first game for Kenneth Walker really being the man in this backfield. I expect it to be somewhat of a close game so they can really rely on the running game there in Seattle a little bit. With the volume that he could see and the bye weeks that we have, I'll start Kenneth Walker. which will take us down to Buffalo and Kansas City, which should be a very exciting game to watch here this week in the NFL. Start off with Devin Singletary, currently running back 30 overall, and even in a blowout game last week, was really unable to get much volume. Only had 7 touches in that game last week against Pittsburgh. He's highly touchdown dependent and really doesn't get very many chances to score touchdowns because they're constantly throwing the ball deep down the field to Gabe Davis or Stephon Diggs. We're seeing, other running backs involved in James Cook and Zach Moss a little bit. He's sitting right around 11.5 touches a game, which is not a lot. Kansas City just got torched on the ground by Josh Jacobs. They allow over 24 fantasy points per game. No major injury concerns here. Kansas City can hang with Buffalo, I believe, this week and really keep this game a lot closer than what we saw last week. That's going to open the door for more potential volume. This is by no means some easy start. You got to start Devin Singletary with this week. No, he's a bye week fill-in, a flex play at best, somebody who'll be a little bit further down the rankings, but in a potentially high-scoring game, could get some scoring opportunities, fingers crossed. His opponent, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, a down week 5 for CEH, barely missed having another touchdown though, was ruled short of the goal line, and that really would have helped out his owners just last week. The concerning part is how good Jerick McKinnon looked on the ground. As of right now, CEH still running back 9 overall, mostly because of the touchdowns he continues to score because he's not getting a ton of volume, sitting right around 12 touches a week. This is a super tough matchup for them this week going up against Buffalo. They only allow 16.7 fantasy points per game. No other major injury concerns here, though for CEH, not a smash start by any means. He needs touchdowns to be fantasy relevant. Luckily for him, he plays in an offense that scores a lot of touchdowns in a matchup against a team that can put some points on the board, which means they're going to have to continue to throw it. That makes Clyde Edwards-Helaire a start once again, maybe not a smash start as well. Another one of those guys as a bye week fill-in, a flex play this week with a little bit lower ceiling. Which will take us down to Sunday Night Football. The Dallas Cowboys and Philadelphia Eagles should be a great game to watch there, an interdivisional matchup. Starting off with the Dallas Cowboys, you got Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. Now, Zeke continues to dominate the touches, but do nothing with them. He's had 20 plus touches in back-to-back games. Pollard barely getting 10 touches a game, but continues to be that bigger play guy. We've seen him with a big play now in 2 of the last 3 games played. What's crazy is that Zeke is still averaging 17 touches a week, where Pollard's hovering right around that 10 mark that he just saw. Now a matchup going up against Philadelphia. They're allowing only 19.4 fantasy points per game, but as of late have been playing really well against opposing running backs. All the offensive line injuries, and now they may not even have Jason Peters as well. Does Dak return? We still don't know. Doesn't really matter at this point because Cooper Rush is not playing bad by any means. This is more a product of a bad offensive line play that's really affecting Zeke. So I don't think we can start either one of these guys this week. I can't say with any confidence I could start either one of them. Everything on paper says to sit Zeke. His production, outside of his volume, right? He's getting the touches. He's just not going anywhere with them. These guys, if you want to use one, it would still be Zeke for me just due to that volume, and you're hoping that he can break a big one, fall into the end zone from the goal line, something like that, but the risk is absolutely huge for Miles Sanders. He's currently running back 12 overall. He's coming off of a down week just last week as well, but I'm not overly shocked. Arizona's been playing pretty good against opposing running backs. Miles Sanders still saw 74% of the snaps, hovering right around 19 touches a week, and now gets a matchup here going up against Dallas, which is pretty good against opposing running backs. They allow only 15.6 fantasy points to opposing running backs, 5th fewest in the NFL. But this offensive line is something else we need to start paying attention to because they're racking up the injuries. Jordan Mailata, now Jason Kelce, Landon Dickerson. We can't continue to rack up these offensive line injuries. That's what's really helping us with Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders here to start the year. You can't really afford to sit this guy. The ceiling is too high. He's going to be a start. How about Denver and LA? The Chargers on Monday Night Football. Yeah, I know. The Broncos, again, primetime. I get it. I'm not overly excited about it either. But Melvin Gordon is still the lead back in this offense. The scoring opportunities just haven't been there for him. Plus, now you're starting to sprinkle in a little bit of Mike Boone. Is Latavius Murray even active this week? Gordon is averaging right around 13 touches a game. Boone just saw 10 last week. I don't even know if we can count on Latavius Murray at this point, but this is a great matchup. The Chargers allow the most points in the NFL to opposing running backs at almost 29 fantasy points per game. I really want this to be a Melvin Gordon week. We desperately need it with all of these bye weeks. You know Russell Wilson is going to play, but he just had a minor procedure on his shoulder to alleviate pain. Does that mean that we see maybe less Russ down the field, more reliancy on the running game for a week or two? That could be great. They are missing a couple offensive linemen with Garrett Bowles and Quinn Meinerz, not being able to play. So that has been an issue for this offense. Just overall confusion in the offense of the Denver Broncos, but this is such a great matchup, and I'm hoping that with the banged up shoulder of Russell Wilson, we see more reliancy on these running backs. He may be a low-end start, but I'm going to start Melvin Gordon nonetheless, and then his opponent, Austin Ekeler, absolutely starting Austin Ekeler. He's all the way up to running back 2 on the season after back-to-back huge games. And he's only 10 points behind Nick Chubb. How crazy is that? He's coming off a game in which he had 173 yards rushing on just 16 carries, and has 5 touchdowns combined over his last 2 games played. He's all the way up over 18 touches per week as an average. Just had over 20 for the first time since week 2 as well last week. Much more difficult matchup for him this week, though, than last week. Denver, they allow 17.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, 10th fewest in the NFL. Still really unsure whether or not Keenan Allen plays, because Ekeler's really benefiting from him not being out there. Ekeler is the clear reason why this team has won back-to-back games, though, and I really expect them to continue to lean on this guy. If Keenan Allen is out again, the numbers go even higher for Austin Ekeler, and right now, you just can't ever afford to sit this guy. All right, but there you have it. All my starts and sits for the running back position here, week 6 fantasy football. Like I said, we don't want to get too cute in bye weeks. Some of these guys are obvious starts, but I wanted to make sure that you have the information that goes along with these guys so you can make the best decisions for your fantasy team. Don't forget, though, the Joe Mixon jersey. Where did I put it? That's over here. Right here. The signed Joe Mixon jersey. Make sure you get on that, hit the like button, leave a comment down below if you're interested, and make sure you have that free account signed up at pristineauction.com, link down below in the description. But for now, I'm going to get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.